Let us know where you're watching from today as we delve into an extraordinary courtroom drama that unfolded in the Federal District Court of San Francisco. A simple gold cross around Barry Bonds' neck would become the catalyst for an unprecedented legal showdown that no one saw coming. The morning sun filtered through the towering windows of Courtroom 4A, casting long shadows across the polished oak benches. Barry Bonds, the legendary MLB slugger whose name had become synonymous with both athletic excellence and controversy, sat with an air of quiet confidence. Around his neck, a modest gold cross caught the morning light, a symbol of faith that would soon spark an unexpected confrontation. Judge Victoria Hawthorne's reputation for strict adherence to courtroom protocol preceded her. Her 27 years on the bench had earned her the nickname, the Iron Gavel, among legal circles. As she entered the courtroom, her sharp eyes immediately fixed upon the religious symbol adorning the neck of the former baseball superstar. The tension in the air was palpable as Judge Hawthorne's voice cut through the hushed whispers of the gallery. "Mr. Bonds, I notice you're wearing a religious symbol in my courtroom. I'll have to ask you to remove it." Her tone carried the weight of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. James Sullivan, Bonds' lead attorney, straightened in his chair, but before he could speak, Bonds replied with unexpected composure. "Your Honor, with all due respect, I believe I have a constitutional right to wear this cross." His voice was calm, measured, carrying none of the defiance that had characterized his earlier battles with authority. The gallery fell silent. Court Clerk Michael Zhang's pen stopped mid-stroke. Even Alexandra Cooper, the assistant district attorney known for her aggressive prosecution style, looked up with sudden interest. This wasn't part of the scheduled proceedings, but something far more intriguing was unfolding. Judge Hawthorne's expression hardened. "Mr. Bonds, this is my courtroom, and I require all religious symbols to be removed. I'll fine you $1,000 for each minute that cross remains around your neck." She expected the threat of financial penalty to achieve what her authority alone had not. What happened next would become the stuff of legal legend. Barry Bonds, the man who had faced down the fiercest pitchers in baseball history, now prepared to face a different kind of challenge. His response would reveal a side of him few had seen before, not the power hitter, but the constitutional scholar. "Your Honor," Bonds began, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent courtroom, "I've spent considerable time studying constitutional law, particularly the First Amendment. The Supreme Court has consistently held that the government cannot prohibit the free exercise of religion, which includes the right to wear religious symbols." Dr. Patricia Morgan, a legal expert observing the proceedings, leaned forward in her seat. This was no ordinary courtroom exchange. This was a masterclass in constitutional rights unfolding before their eyes. Isabella Rodriguez, Bonds' assistant, watched with barely concealed pride as her employer continued his legal discourse. "Furthermore, Your Honor, in the case of Good News Club versus Milford Central School, the Supreme Court reaffirmed that viewpoint discrimination against religious expression violates the First Amendment's free speech clause." Judge Hawthorne's grip on her gavel tightened. This was not the Barry Bonds the media had portrayed, the confrontational athlete with a chip on his shoulder. This was someone else entirely, articulate, knowledgeable, and unshakably calm in the face of authority. In addition, Bonds continued, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act requires that any substantial burden on religious exercise must be justified by a compelling governmental interest and must use the least restrictive means of furthering that interest. I respectfully submit that banning a simple cross necklace serves no compelling governmental interest. The courtroom had become absolutely still. Officers Martinez and Jackson exchanged glances. They had witnessed countless courtroom dramas, but nothing quite like this. This wasn't about baseball statistics or steroid allegations. This was about fundamental constitutional rights. Dr. Benjamin Foster, a constitutional law expert present for the original proceedings, would later describe this moment as a perfect storm of legal expertise meeting unwavering conviction. It was becoming clear that Barry Bonds had done more than just wear a cross. He had come prepared to defend his right to do so. Judge Hawthorne's face remained impassive, but those who knew her well could see the subtle signs of recalculation. She was facing not just a former baseball star, but someone who had clearly done his homework. The simple threat of a fine had evolved into a constitutional law debate that could have far-reaching implications. "Your Honor," Bonds spoke again, his voice remaining respectful but firm. "The Supreme Court has also held in Capitol Square Review and Advisory Board v. Panett that private religious expression receives the same protections as private non-religious expression. By singling out religious symbols for prohibition, while allowing other personal accessories, the court would be engaging in precisely the kind of content-based discrimination that the First Amendment prohibits." Richard Collins, the court reporter, found his fingers flying across his stenograph at unprecedented speed. Every word of this exchange needed to be preserved. This was no longer just about a cross or a fine. This was about the intersection of religious freedom and judicial authority. Alexandra Cooper watched with growing fascination. As a prosecutor, she had researched Bonds extensively, but nothing in his file had prepared her for this display of legal knowledge. The man who had once dominated baseball was now commanding the courtroom with an entirely different kind of expertise. Judge Hawthorne's silence stretched for what seemed like an eternity. The morning sun had climbed higher, its rays now illuminating the very cross that had sparked this constitutional showdown. Finally, she spoke, her voice carrying a note of grudging respect. "Mr. Bonds, your knowledge of constitutional law is unexpected. But this raises an interesting legal question that deserves proper consideration." She paused, weighing her next words carefully. "I'm going to take this matter under advisement. In the meantime, you may keep wearing your cross." The gallery erupted in hushed whispers. Isabella Rodriguez quickly made notes on her tablet, knowing this moment would be discussed in law schools for years to come. Dr. Patricia Morgan was already composing mental outlines for the legal articles she would write about this unprecedented exchange. James Sullivan sat back in his chair, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. His client had just accomplished something remarkable. He had transformed what could have been a confrontational moment into a teachable one, demonstrating not just knowledge of the law, but the wisdom to apply it appropriately. As the regular proceedings resumed, the morning's events had already begun to ripple through the legal community. Text messages were being sent, social media was buzzing, and legal scholars were preparing to weigh in on this unexpected constitutional law lesson from an unlikely teacher. Barry Bonds sat quietly, the cross still hanging around his neck, a symbol now not just of his faith, but of his understanding that true power often lies not in confrontation, but in knowing and standing up for one's rights with dignity and respect. The day's scheduled proceedings would continue, but something fundamental had shifted in courtroom 4A. A simple gold cross had become the catalyst for a moment that would be remembered not for its conflict, but for its demonstration that knowledge, calmly and respectfully presented, could be more powerful than any show of authority. The lunch recess at the Federal District Court of San Francisco buzzed with an energy usually reserved for high-stakes verdicts. Barry Bonds' morning display of constitutional expertise had transformed a routine hearing into something extraordinary. As legal professionals huddled in small groups throughout the courthouse corridors, the morning's events were being dissected with the same intensity once reserved for analyzing his home run statistics. In her chambers, Judge Victoria Hawthorne sat behind her mahogany desk, surrounded by leather-bound volumes of constitutional law. Her clerk, Michael Zhang, had already pulled the cases Bonds had cited, laying them out before her like pieces of an unexpected puzzle. The judge's reputation for unwavering authority now faced a unique challenge, not from defiance, but from knowledge. "I've confirmed all his citations, Your Honor," Zhang reported, his voice carrying a note of admiration. Every case law reference was accurate. He wasn't just quoting, he understood the precedents. The young clerk's usual professional detachment had given way to genuine impressed. Down the hall, in a small conference room, James Sullivan sat with his client, the morning's golden cross still hanging prominently around Bonds' neck. "You've studied more than just pitchers' tendencies, haven't you?" Sullivan's question carried both admiration and curiosity. Bonds' response revealed another layer to his preparation. "When you've been under scrutiny as long as I have, you learn that knowledge is the best defense. I spent years studying constitutional law, not for show, but because I needed to understand my rights at a fundamental level." In the courthouse cafeteria, Assistant District Attorney Alexandra Cooper found herself in an animated discussion with Dr. Benjamin Foster, the constitutional law expert. "It's unprecedented," Foster observed, pushing his coffee aside. "We're used to seeing celebrities with teams of lawyers whispering in their ears." But Bonds demonstrated a genuine understanding of complex constitutional principles. The morning's events had already spread beyond the courthouse walls. Dr. Patricia Morgan was giving an impromptu interview to legal journalists gathered outside. "What we witnessed today was more than a courtroom drama," she explained. "It was a masterclass in how constitutional rights can be defended with dignity and knowledge rather than confrontation." As the afternoon session approached, Isabella Rodriguez worked quietly at her tablet, fielding calls from legal publications across the country. The story had struck a chord that transcended both sports and legal circles. It was about preparation, respect, and the power of understanding one's rights. Officers Martinez and Jackson, manning their security posts, overheard snippets of conversations that revealed how deeply the morning's events had resonated. "Did you know he studied law during the off-seasons? I heard he has a private library dedicated to constitutional cases." The rumors were beginning to build, adding layers to the already compelling narrative. When court resumed for the afternoon session, the gallery had swelled with legal observers and students who had heard about the morning's exchange. Judge Hawthorne's entrance carried a different energy now. The dynamic between her and the former baseball star had shifted in subtle but significant ways. "Before we proceed with the scheduled matters," Judge Hawthorne began, her voice carrying across the now-packed courtroom, "I want to address this morning's discussion regarding religious expression in court." The room fell silent, all eyes moving between the judge and Barry Bonds. "Having reviewed the relevant precedents," she continued, "I find Mr. Bonds' arguments regarding the First Amendment and the Religious Freedom Restoration Act to be both pertinent and well-reasoned." The admission carried the weight of someone who valued truth above authority. Richard Collins' stenograph captured every word as Judge Hawthorne continued. "This court acknowledges that the wearing of religious symbols, when not disruptive to proceedings, is protected under constitutional law. The fine is hereby withdrawn, and I want to commend Mr. Bonds for his articulate and respectful presentation of legal precedent." The gallery remained silent, but the energy in the room was electric. This wasn't just a victory for Bonds, it was a moment that would be cited in legal textbooks, a reminder that knowledge of one's rights, properly expressed, could change minds and create precedent. Alexandra Cooper found herself reassessing her approach to the case. The man she had prepared to face was not the one sitting at the defense table. This Barry Bonds was more complex, more prepared, and infinitely more intriguing from a legal perspective. During a brief recess, Dr. Foster shared his observations with a group of law students who had rushed to the courthouse after hearing about the morning's events. "What you're witnessing," he explained, "is the intersection of constitutional rights and personal conviction. Mr. Bonds has demonstrated that understanding the law is not just for lawyers, it's for anyone who wants to protect their rights effectively." Isabella Rodriguez noticed how other defendants in the courthouse began touching their own religious symbols, crosses, stars of David, prayer beads, with newfound confidence. Bonds' stand had created a ripple effect, reminding everyone that religious expression was not just tolerated, but protected under law. As the afternoon proceedings continued, James Sullivan observed how his client's demeanor remained unchanged, neither triumphant nor smug. Bonds sat with the same quiet confidence he had shown in the morning, the cross around his neck now a symbol of something larger than personal faith. "Your Honor," Bonds addressed the court during a procedural matter, his voice carrying the same measured tone from the morning. "I want to express my appreciation for your willingness to consider the constitutional implications of this issue." His words carried no trace of victory, only respect for the legal process. Judge Hawthorne's response was equally measured. "Mr. Bonds, your presentation of constitutional law this morning has reminded this court of the importance of protecting individual rights, even in matters that might seem minor at first glance." In the gallery, a young law student whispered to her colleague, "This is why we study constitutional law. It's not just about big cases, it's about protecting fundamental rights in everyday situations." Her words captured the essence of what had transpired. As the day's proceedings drew to a close, The implications of the morning's exchange continued to expand. Legal blogs were already publishing analyses, constitutional scholars were preparing commentaries, and law professors were updating their lesson plans to include this real-world example of constitutional rights in action. Michael Zhang, organizing the day's files, reflected on how a simple cross had led to such a significant legal discussion. "It's not about the symbol," he mused to a colleague. "It's about understanding and standing up for our rights in a way that commands respect." Outside the courthouse, as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the steps, reporters gathered to capture comments from those who had witnessed the day's events. Dr. Patricia Morgan's summary would later be quoted in law reviews. "Today, Barry Bonds showed us that knowledge of the law, combined with respectful assertion of one's rights, can be more powerful than any authority." Isabella Rodriguez fielded calls from legal education programs requesting materials about the exchange. The incident was already being formatted into case studies, its implications extending far beyond the immediate issue of religious expression in court. As Barry Bonds prepared to leave the courthouse, the cross still hanging around his neck caught the late afternoon light. A young lawyer approached him, asking, "Mr. Bonds, what made you study constitutional law so thoroughly?" His response would be remembered long after the day's events. "In baseball, you study your opponent to prepare for the game. In life, you study the law to protect your rights. Both require dedication, respect, and the wisdom to know when and how to stand your ground." The day's events had transformed a potential confrontation into a teaching moment, reminding everyone present that true authority comes not from position or power, but from understanding and respectfully asserting one's rights under the law. The morning after Barry Bonds' remarkable display of constitutional knowledge, the Federal District Court of San Francisco found itself at the center of a national conversation. News outlets that had once focused solely on Bonds' athletic achievements were now dissecting his legal expertise, and social media was ablaze with clips of his composed defense of religious freedom. In her private law library, Judge Victoria Hawthorne sat reviewing the previous day's transcript, provided by Richard Collins. Her morning coffee grew cold as she found herself repeatedly returning to Bonds' precise citations of legal precedent. "In 30 years on the bench," she confided to Michael Zhang, "I've never seen anything quite like this." The story had taken on a life of its own. Legal forums were flooding with discussions about the intersection of religious freedom and courtroom protocol. Dr. Benjamin Foster had already received calls from 3 major law schools requesting him to develop a case study based on the incident. "What makes this extraordinary," Dr. Foster explained to a gathering of legal scholars in the courthouse library, "isn't just that Bonds knew the law. It's how he presented it. No grandstanding, no confrontation, just clear, cogent legal reasoning delivered with respect for the court." Isabella Rodriguez arrived early that morning to find her inbox overflowing with interview requests. Legal publications wanted to know more about Bonds' journey into constitutional law. Sports networks, usually focused on batting averages and home run records, were now asking about his legal studies. James Sullivan, entering the courthouse for the day's proceedings, was stopped by a group of young law students. "How long has Mr. Bonds been studying constitutional law?" one asked eagerly. Sullivan's response would later be quoted in several legal blogs. "Some athletes study the rulebook. Barry studied the Constitution." Alexandra Cooper found herself in an unusual position. As the assistant district attorney, she had prepared to face Barry Bonds, the baseball player. Now she was facing Barry Bonds, the constitutional scholar. During her morning preparation, she found herself approaching the case with a different kind of respect. "The fascinating aspect," Dr. Patricia Morgan commented during a morning television interview, "is how this challenges our preconceptions. We're quick to put people in boxes: athlete, celebrity, defendant. Bonds just showed us why that's a mistake." The courthouse security officers, Martinez and Jackson, noticed a change in the morning's crowd. Mixed with the usual legal professionals were sports fans carrying law books instead of baseball caps. "Never thought I'd see someone ask Barry Bonds to sign a copy of the Constitution," Martinez mused to his partner. Inside the courtroom, as the regular proceedings continued, there was a subtle but significant shift in atmosphere. Other defendants sat straighter, paid closer attention. Many had religious symbols visible now, not as acts of defiance, but as expressions of protected rights they better understood. During a brief recess, Michael Zhang overheard two veteran lawyers discussing the previous day's events. "It's one thing to have a good legal team," one said. "It's another entirely to understand the law so well you can defend your own rights with that level of precision." The impact extended beyond the courthouse. Law professors across the country were already incorporating the incident into their lessons. "This is a perfect example," one prominent constitutional law professor wrote in a viral social media post, "of why understanding your rights isn't just for lawyers, it's for everyone." Barry Bonds himself maintained his characteristic composure as he entered the courthouse for the second day. The cross still hung around his neck, but it had become more than a religious symbol. It was now a reminder that knowledge, properly applied, could be more powerful than any authority. "Mr. Bonds," a reporter called out as he climbed the courthouse steps, "did you expect your legal knowledge to create such a stir?" His response was characteristically measured. "I studied the law because I believe understanding your rights is as important as exercising them." Inside, Judge Hawthorne had made her own adjustments. A memo had been circulated to all court officers regarding religious expression in court. While maintaining decorum remains paramount, it read, "We must balance it with constitutionally protected rights of religious expression." The gallery was packed again, but the audience had changed. Alongside the usual court observers were law students with notebooks, legal scholars with keen eyes, and even a few religious rights advocates, all drawn by the previous day's display of constitutional expertise. Dr. Foster, preparing for an afternoon lecture on the case, noted how Bonds had inadvertently created a teaching moment about the practical application of constitutional law. "He's shown us that constitutional rights aren't just theoretical, they're practical tools for protecting individual freedoms." Isabella Rodriguez watched as social media continued to spread the story. Hashtags like #KnowYourRights and #BondsConstitutional were trending. What had started as a simple courtroom exchange was evolving into a movement about legal literacy and religious freedom. During the afternoon session, another defendant cited one of the same cases Bonds had mentioned, relating to religious expression. Judge Hawthorne listened attentively, noting how the previous day's events had already begun influencing others to better understand and articulate their rights. "What we're seeing," Dr. Patricia Morgan explained to a group of journalists, "is the democratization of legal knowledge. Bonds has reminded us that understanding constitutional law isn't just for legal professionals, it's a tool for everyone to protect their rights." James Sullivan observed how his client's example had changed the dynamic in the courtroom. Other attorneys were spending more time explaining legal principles to their clients, inspired by Bonds' demonstration that defendants could actively participate in their own legal defense. Alexandra Cooper found herself restructuring her arguments, aware that she was facing someone who understood not just the charges against him, but the constitutional framework within which those charges existed. It was a subtle shift, but a significant one. During a lunch recess, a law professor visiting the courthouse shared an observation with Michael Zhang. "What Bonds did yesterday wasn't just about wearing a cross. He showed us that knowledge of the law is the greatest equalizer in our justice system." The cross around Bonds' neck had become a symbol of something larger, a reminder that rights undefended could become rights undone. Other defendants in the courthouse began asking their attorneys more detailed questions about their rights, inspired by Bonds' example. The real impact, Dr. Foster noted during an afternoon interview, might not be in the legal precedent, but in how it's inspiring people to better understand their constitutional rights. That's a legacy that could outlast any sporting achievement. As the day progressed, the courthouse steps became a forum for impromptu discussions about constitutional rights. Law students debated precedents, religious rights advocates shared resources, and court observers traded stories about other cases where knowledge of the law had made a crucial difference. Isabella Rodriguez had begun compiling a record of the media coverage, noting how the narrative had evolved. What had started as a story about a confrontation over a religious symbol had become a discussion about legal education, constitutional rights, and the importance of being prepared to defend one's freedoms. Judge Hawthorne, preparing for the afternoon session, reflected on how one incident had sparked such widespread discussion. "Perhaps," she confided to her clerk, "this will encourage more people to study and understand the laws that protect their rights." As the day drew to a close, Barry Bonds' impact on the legal community continued to grow. Law schools were already developing case studies, civil rights organizations were planning educational programs, and legal scholars were preparing articles analyzing the broader implications of his constitutional defense. The story had transcended its original context, becoming a powerful reminder that knowledge of the law was not just the province of legal professionals but a tool available to anyone willing to study and understand their rights. Bonds had shown that in the courtroom, as in baseball, preparation and understanding could level any playing field. 1 week after Barry Bonds' remarkable constitutional defense, the ripples of his courtroom stance had transformed into waves of change across the legal landscape. What began as a simple assertion of religious rights had evolved into a nationwide conversation about legal education and constitutional literacy. Judge Victoria Hawthorne had made an unprecedented decision. For the first time in her career, she called a press conference in the courthouse's main hall. "What occurred in this courtroom last week," she began, her voice carrying the weight of decades on the bench, "has prompted us to re-examine how we view religious expression in our courts." The judge's statement would become a cornerstone of legal discussions across the country. Mr. Bonds reminded us that knowledge of the law isn't just the privilege of those who practice it, it's the right and responsibility of every citizen. His defense of his religious freedom wasn't just about wearing a cross. It was about understanding and articulating one's constitutional rights with dignity and respect. Dr. Benjamin Foster had begun working with law schools to develop a new curriculum component focused on real-world applications of constitutional rights. The Bonds incident, as it was now being called in legal circles, had become a case study in how knowledge of the law could empower individuals within the justice system. Isabella Rodriguez found herself managing a different kind of schedule for her employer. Instead of sports appearances, Bonds was now being invited to speak at law schools and civil rights forums. His message remained consistent: understanding your rights is as important as having them. In the courthouse corridors, Michael Zhang noticed a significant change. Defendants were arriving more prepared, often carrying notes about relevant cases and constitutional precedents. "They're following Bonds' example," he observed to Richard Collins. "They're not just relying on their attorneys, they're educating themselves about their rights." James Sullivan had received countless calls from other defense attorneys, all asking the same question: how long had Bonds been studying constitutional law? His answer revealed a deeper truth. He approached the law the same way he approached baseball, with dedication, focus, and a determination to master the fundamentals. Alexandra Cooper found herself advocating for changes in the prosecutor's office. "We need to be prepared for more defendants like Bonds," she argued in a staff meeting. "People who understand their rights and can articulate them effectively. It changes the dynamic of our legal system, and we need to adapt." Dr. Patricia Morgan had published a comprehensive analysis of the incident in a leading law review. "What makes the Bonds case significant," she wrote, "is not just the outcome, but how it challenges our assumptions about legal knowledge and citizen empowerment within the justice system." The cross that had sparked this legal revolution remained around Bonds' neck, but its significance had evolved. It was no longer just a symbol of faith, but a reminder that rights must be understood to be properly defended. Other courthouses across the country had begun revising their policies on religious expression, using Judge Hawthorne's new guidelines as a template. Officers Martinez and Jackson had noticed a change in courthouse security protocols as well. "We're not just looking for potential threats anymore," Martinez explained during a training session. "We're being trained to understand and respect constitutional rights, especially regarding religious expression." The impact extended far beyond the legal community. Religious organizations of all faiths had begun offering workshops on constitutional rights. Study groups formed in communities across the country, with citizens gathering to learn about their legal rights and responsibilities. 1 month after the incident, Barry Bonds stood at a podium in Harvard Law School's prestigious lecture hall. His audience included not just law students and professors, but civil rights activists, religious leaders, and citizens interested in understanding their constitutional rights. Baseball taught me that preparation determines performance, Bonds told the packed auditorium. But studying constitutional law taught me something even more important, that knowledge of your rights is the foundation of true freedom. You can't defend what you don't understand. Back in San Francisco, Judge Hawthorne had implemented new procedures in her courtroom. Before each session, a brief statement was read, acknowledging and respecting the constitutional right to religious expression, as long as it didn't disrupt proceedings. Other courts across the country were following suit. Dr. Foster's case study had become required reading in constitutional law classes nationwide. The Bonds effect, as academics were calling it, demonstrated how individual knowledge of constitutional rights could influence institutional change. Isabella Rodriguez had helped establish the Bonds Constitutional Education Initiative, a foundation dedicated to helping ordinary citizens understand their legal rights. Mr. Bonds believes that constitutional literacy should be as fundamental as reading and writing, she explained to potential donors. The courthouse where it all began had undergone its own transformation. A new resource center offered materials on constitutional rights, and weekly seminars helped people understand their legal protections. Michael Zhang often volunteered there, sharing his first-hand account of how knowledge had trumped authority. James Sullivan found himself reflecting on how one moment had catalyzed such significant change. In all my years of practice, he shared during a bar association meeting, I've never seen anything quite like this, a defendant's knowledge of the law actually changing how the law is applied. The media narrative had shifted dramatically. Sports reporters now asked Bonds about constitutional law alongside questions about his baseball career. Legal commentators analyzed his courtroom performance with the same intensity once reserved for his batting statistics. Alexandra Cooper had revised her approach to prosecution, encouraging her team to view informed defendants not as obstacles, but as participants in a more balanced justice system. When both sides understand the law, she noted, justice is better served. Dr. Patricia Morgan's continued research revealed an unexpected trend. Law school applications had increased, with many applicants citing the Bonds incident as their inspiration. He showed us that legal knowledge isn't just for lawyers, one applicant wrote. It's for anyone who values their rights. The cross around Bonds' neck had become more than evidence in a legal precedent. It was now a symbol of how knowledge and respect could change a system from within. Other athletes and public figures had begun following his example, studying and speaking about constitutional rights. Judge Hawthorne, reflecting on the transformation she had witnessed, made a final notation in her case records. What occurred in this courtroom wasn't just about religious freedom. It was about the power of knowledge to transform conflict into understanding, confrontation into dialogue, and authority into respect. As the story continued to inspire others, Barry Bonds maintained his characteristic humility. When asked about his impact on the legal system, his response reflected the wisdom that had started it all. I didn't set out to change the system. I just believed that understanding your rights was as important as having them. The legacy of those few minutes in court continued to grow. Law schools, religious organizations, and civil rights groups worked together to create educational programs. Citizens from all walks of life began studying constitutional law, not to become lawyers, but to become better informed participants in the legal system. Isabella Rodriguez's final entry in her record of events captured the essence of what had transpired. Sometimes the most powerful changes come not from challenging authority, but from understanding the principles that govern it. Mr. Bonds didn't just defend his right to wear a cross. He reminded us that knowledge of the law belongs to everyone. As this story spread across the country, it carried a simple but powerful message. In a society governed by laws, understanding those laws is the first step toward ensuring justice. The cross around Barry Bonds' neck had started as a personal expression of faith but had become a symbol of something larger, the power of knowledge to transform not just one courtroom, but an entire system of justice. Has someone ever challenged your rights? Did you feel prepared to defend them? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories of justice and understanding.